Hi, my name is Rena Moran, State Representative from District 65A, and we are coming to you live. We are a body of the people of color Indigenous Caucus. We call ourselves the POCI Caucus, who are made up of legislators from across the state of Minnesota who do our work through a race conscious lens because one, we believe that race matters. And two, our work and our fight is around social, racial, economic justice. When we say our fight, it is to create laws and policies that are fair and just, that represent all of us. And I am excited that as a legislator, as an African American legislator and a legislator of color, that I have 13 other champion legislators of color who have been working really hard over a while to make sure that we're bringing the voices of our community, the voices of our children, our schools, our parents, our youth into the body of the Minnesota House of Representatives so that we can have a space and a place and are able to shape policies that represent who we are and whom my state needs to be so that we can be under the Waltz administration of One Minnesota. And so on May the 25th, um, we all know that George Floyd was murdered. We on May the 26th, we all saw that visual of George Floyd laying on the ground with officer, ex-officer Chavez with his knee on his neck. And we watched in horror as he laid on the ground, repeatedly saying, I cannot breathe. Repeatedly asking the officer to recognize that he could not breathe. We heard him call out to his mother on the ground as Chavez continued to press his knee on his neck. And he did that until Floyd George was no longer able to breathe. That horrific vision, that horrific visual that we saw are all too common for many of us in our communities of color. That type of interaction, that type of excessive use of force, that type of putting your knee or a chokehold on individuals' necks from our community where they can no longer breathe has become all too common. But it is not okay. It is not okay for that type of inhumanity to be allowed by police officers who have been given the privilege, the right, and the honor and the power to serve and protect. And so in response to that, we as a body in the Minnesota House of Representatives, including our DFL majority, led by the DFL Posse Caucus, are calling out. We are screaming so much like George Floyd did as he laid on that ground to say to the legislative body in the Senate, we need and we must have police accountability. We must stop and prevent police brutality from happening. No more can bad cops who make good cops look bad be able to just get away with that type of behavior. No longer can bad cops make the institution of policing look bad. And of course, we do know that not all cops are bad cops. And yes, we also know that not all good cops, that they are all good cops. But for the bad ones who show up with bad behaviors and do horrendous acts like we saw from George Floyd, and let me just state the other three officers, there are consequences to that. And so today we want to connect with the community and hear from you. We want to share with you the policies that we're moving in the House of Representatives to hold police officers when bad actors show up accountable for that bad act. And so I just want to say again, we're going to do some quick introductions of our Posse Caucus. We have several of our members here online, not all. It has been a very, very busy session, special session since the death of George Floyd. Many of us have been pulled and stretched in so many directions, but all the directions that we have been pulled in leads to us moving policies and practices that are fair and just, that represent the voices that comes from our community. So what I would like to do, representing District 65A, which is the Rondo, the historical Rondo community, Frogtown, Midway, also represent a district of the North End and a little part of Cathedral Hill. I would also like the opportunity to introduce to you the other members of the POCI Caucus before we get started with the community, and let them introduce themselves and speak a little bit about their work, who they are, and the leadership that they bring to Minnesota House of Representatives. And so I have a list of participants here. So I'm just going to start in the order that I see us on the list. And so I'm also, I forgot to mention, I'm also the current chair of the People of Color Indigenous Caucus. And they've have given me the honor and privilege to do that. And I really do appreciate you guys' support of that. It's not easy, but we're going to continue to move forward. So why don't we allow Representative Jay Zahn to go next, introduce himself, and we go from there.
Thank you, Chair Moran, for hosting this event. My name is Jay Zahn. I'm the state representative from House District 67B, representing the southeast corner of the city of St. Paul. I am also one of the moderators doing the technical work behind this event. So if you have questions, comments, feel free to comment here on our official POCI Caucus page so that I can relay the message back to the group. Or you are also welcome to join us on the Zoom call if you can just message here on the Facebook group saying that you would like to join us live via video chat. I will email you the link. And also Representative Mahmoud Noor will also have a call-in line for those of you who are not able to join us via video chat.
All right, thank you, Representative Jay Zahn. Representative Ayesha Gomez.
Hi, Representative Ayesha Gomez. I represent South Minneapolis, District 62B. So it's sort of like from Chicago to Lyndale, Lake Street to 50th, and then part of Powderhorn tacked on the side. And happy to be here today. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Representative Hodan Hassan.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. My name is Hodan Hassan. I am the state rep representing South Minneapolis, District 62A. Thank you, Chair Moran and Representative Jay Zahn and Representative Noor for organizing this conversation. I'm excited to hear what our community have to say. As we know, police, brutality is a real problem in our community, the Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Minnesota. But that's not the only system that discriminates us. We also have, we're lacking equity in all other aspects of our, all aspects of life, including the healthcare system, the education system, economic development. So I'm excited to hear from our community, but I'm also excited to have, to be part of this team who have been fighting since George Floyd's death, and even before that, but since George Floyd's death, to pass a police accountability that has the community voices. And this is what this conversation is about, to make sure that we carry our community voices with us, whether we pass the legislation or not. Well, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you, Representative Hassan. Representative Kali Herb. Okay, Representative Kali, we'll come back to you. Kali?
Hey, I'm going to go off of camera because my internet is unstable. So I'm just going to speak. I'm State Representative for 64A, covers the Caucus Hill, Lexham neighborhood, the St. Anthony Park, part of Midway area. And so I'm really happy to be on today with all of you and to kind of hear where everybody is right now that it's been a few weeks after George Floyd's killing. And so I'm excited to be a part of this. And thank you, Rep. Moran, Chair Moran, for hosting this and having us all on today.
All right, thank you, Representative Herb. We're going to move on to Representative Jamie Becker-Finn.
Hi, Representative Jamie Becker-Finn. I live in Roseville and represent the northern Ramsey County suburbs. And I'm not going to talk very much because I mostly want to hear from the community. So really proud to be doing this work with everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Becker-Finn. So Representative Mahmoud Noor.
Thank you so much, Chair Moran and my colleagues. Thank you. Today is 1 month, 2 days since the murder of George Floyd. And this is a moment to make sure that we continue to fight for justice. We continue to fight for George Floyd and many others. My name is Mahmoud Noor. I represent District 60B in Minneapolis. That is the southeast and south Minneapolis. I'll be listening to the community. We want to make sure that your voices are heard, and we want to make sure that we engage you as we move forward with the Police Accountability Act that we had introduced and passed in the House of Representatives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative Noor. Representative Fooley.
Thank you, Chair Moran, for organizing this. This is State Representative Fooley. I represent District 59A in North Minneapolis, and as one of the members from the POCI Caucus who has experienced multiple officer-involved deaths over the last 3 to 4 years, I think that this is something that's critical for all of us to work on, and I'm glad to see that our community members are going to be having this dialogue with us, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lee. Representative Ruth Richardson.
Thank you, Rep. Moran. My name is Ruth Richardson, and I live in Mendota Heights, and I represent a portion of Mendota Heights, a portion of Eagan, Inver Grove Heights, and Sunfish Lake, which makes up District 52B. I'm grateful that we are able to have this community conversation today to talk about police accountability, because we know that this is not an issue that started with George Floyd's murder. It's an issue that we have been crying out for justice for centuries on. And we are at a critical moment, I believe, in history in terms of really having an opportunity not only to shine a light on the persistent inequities and disparities that we are seeing within the criminal justice system, but in all other areas of life, from education to housing to employment and everything beyond, in terms of the structures that have been built and that are working exactly the way that they've been designed to work, that have been harmful for our Black and Indigenous and people of color communities, again, for centuries. I'm hopeful in terms of what we have seen in other states that have been moving forward on some agendas related to police accountability and reform. Colorado, for example, has just moved some legislation, New York and other places as well. And it is past time for Minnesota, who was really ground zero since the murder of George Floyd, to do the right thing as well. So thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to hearing the community voice.
Thank you, Representative Richardson. Representative Samantha Vega.
Thank you, Chair Moran. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. I'm State Representative Samantha Vega. I represent District 40B, Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. And I look forward to reconnecting with the community and being re-energized as we continue on this fight.
Thank you so much, Representative Vega. Representative Tuzon. Okay.
I'm calling on the phone.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm on the phone. Hi, I'm State Representative Tu Yong, representing House District 53A, Maplewood, Woodbury, Oakdale, and Landfall. And thank you to Representative Jay Zhang and Representative Noor for sort of setting this up. And thank you, Chair Moran, for coming up with ideas for us to try to reach out to the community and get community voices on this important issue. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tuzon. And so we're going to move on to, I think the last legislators on the call would be Representative Chair Mariani, who is the chair of the Public Safety Committee. He will be introducing himself and taking us forward from there. Representative Mariani, Carlos Mariani.
Good afternoon, Chair Moran. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Very well. I'm having a little technical difficulties as well. You won't see my face, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately. You'll see is the logo for the nonprofit that I lead, the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership, through which I have a Zoom account. So my apologies for that, but that's where that voice is emanating from. First and foremost, respect and love to George Floyd and to the Floyd family. May George rest in power. And much appreciation and love to my colleagues, the people of color, indigenous legislators, a group of 14 of us in the House and 5 in the Senate. When George Floyd was killed on May 25th, this caucus immediately began to put things in motion because we knew there needed to be a response. The speaker reached out to me within 24 hours and asked if I had things ready, things to put forward. I said we're going to work on it absolutely right away. And so we spent leading right up to the special session, hours and hours and hours. Obviously, many of our colleagues, who were at the epicenter of the protest and the accompanying damage to their communities, we're also simultaneously trying to be present and help their own communities with just basic things like safety and food, et cetera. So all love and respect to you all, especially those in South and North Minneapolis. But what we did is we put together a pretty comprehensive set of proposals that really got at both the need to do immediate things, but also the deep driving systems change, the big changes that need to happen, because we all know this is not the first time, it's not the second, it's not even the 100th time. This is a part of the history of our nation, and it's also part of the history of our state. And so we immediately saw a need to address those long, root causes of racism, of anti-Blackness, of violence, of oppression, of the use of a system in the form of our governmental entities to perpetuate all those harms to our communities. And frankly, some of these proposals, they've been around for a while. Representative Chair Moran, you carried some of these bills years ago. Yeah. And Representative Hassad, earlier this issue. And all that, persistently falls on deaf ears in our legislative body. And so our role was to make sure that everybody heard it, that we move forward aggressively, that we don't give up. Even as we push these bills, and the Senate continued, Senate majority right now, it's a Republican majority, continues to not only say no, they continue to not even talk about it. So we put together a package of bills. We offered those We passed it off the floor of the House with strong support. Unfortunately, it was partisan in nature, even though we did have Republican support for some of these provisions as we moved through the committee structure. Unfortunately, when we moved it off the floor, even though it was a good, strong vote, it was strictly along party lines. So we had all our Democrats supporting the bill. The process is we then send that bill to the Senate. The Senate sends a bill, and then we sit down and we talk. That's the process. That pretty much did not happen. We sent that bill forward, and the Senate came in and basically said, "Well, we haven't read your bill. We're running out of time. It's not that serious, and so maybe we can talk about a few small issues. We'll give you a couple of ideas, several ideas." They took all day to do that. They gave us, frankly, incredibly weak ideas. We gave them strong ideas in response, and then they walked away and then did the session. So that brings us to today. I could tell you very quickly, because I really don't want to be doing a lot of talking. I want to be doing a lot of listening. We did a lot of listening. We had several town hall meetings. Many of the POCI caucus members had individual meetings. We had meetings as a caucus. We had meetings as a committee. We had a long committee hearing pretty much all day on Saturday. We had a long committee markup session as well. We always did that by engaging with the community. And so we took advice, we took things off the table that you said, the community say, "Hey, this is not a good idea. This is not going to work." And then we put things on the table that the community said, "You really need to address this." And so as Chair Moran is opposed to going through all the bills, I think what I would do very quickly, because I think it's important to get to the conversation, is just identify really broad terms, what our package was. Our package was chunked out.
And Representative Mariani, I think Nor can put up a visual so folks can also see the bills. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So as Representative Nor does that, I can tell you really quickly that chunked out our 1920 proposals into three parts. Three acts. One was Reclaiming Community Oversight Act. The other was Reforming Accountability Act. And the third one was Reimagining Public Safety Act. And the Reclaiming Community Oversight Act is where we had a number of provisions that had to do with police behaviors, individual behaviors. And so there you're going to see all sorts of changes to the use of force, to the use of chokeholds, to the warrior training ban, to duty to intercede on the part of individual police officers. It's also where we put the Citizen Review Board, which is Representative Gomez's bill, which looks to reintroduce the people's voice back into, quite frankly, directing and controlling the local police department, holding them accountable. And then there was a major big change proposal along with that, which is to reclaim the Post-Board Licensing Board. That's the Peace Officer Standards Training Board. Right now, as we speak, Officer Chauvin is still a licensed police officer in the state of Minnesota. Another way to say that is that that person who killed George Floyd right now still has the blessings of the state being recognized as a holder of a license in order to use deadly force in order to supposedly to protect the public. That tells you pretty much everything I think that we need to know about a broken system that can't even remove the license of someone who knelt on someone's neck for almost 9 minutes and killed them in front of the entire world. That's the state of affairs right now. So that first act was really about all of that. The second act was really a simpler act, but big. It said, when there are wrongdoers, they should be properly investigated and they should be properly prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And so that's the provision that moves prosecution over to the Attorney General's office, because a lot of folks were just not having it in terms of a county attorney that over the years simply refused to bring charges against wrongful acts, against that's caused by wrongful acts by police officers. And in fact, we all know that the only time that's happened within memory was the indictment and prosecution of a black peace officer in Minneapolis. That's it. So then the third part, and then I'll stop, is the Reimagining Public Safety Act. And in that provision, we laid out a vision for the state investing in community-led public safety. So this would put the state clearly in the role of saying, you know what, we're not rejecting police. We certainly want to change, how they do their things and hold them accountable. What we are doing is we're saying there has to be other tools that we use in the community to solve crime, to prevent crime, to solve problems. There's lots of brothers and sisters out there who are currently doing this, with no public resources, whether it's Mad Dads or Safe Streets. They're doing that work, but there's only so much you can do when you're volunteering your time. So the idea is for the state to invest in those kind of programs. It's also where we had training specifically focused on autism and mental health, because a lot of our brothers and sisters, often there's an intersectional issue. There's the story of the young man in Brooklyn Center, African-American, who was autistic and Black, and that all added up to him being killed by local police officers. And so training focused on that, not just training, to check off the box. It's also where we had the residency, where we said that police officers should be required by the local cities to live in the cities that they're policing. And the hope and the expectation is that we would have our own people that moving up into that role and having a relationship with the community. And then finally, it's also where we had Restorative Vote. And I know a lot of folks had questions about that. But quite frankly, Restorative Vote, you only have to understand Jim Crow to understand the importance of Restorative Vote for police accountability, because there's a vicious cycle where we as a society pass all sorts of laws that target Black folks in particular, but people of color in general, for all sorts of infractions. They wind up with records. Because of those records, time in jail, et cetera, they can't vote. And if you can't vote, that means you don't have the power to shape who polices your community, because who makes those decisions? Elected people. So anyway, that was the big approach that we laid out, very comprehensive. It came straight from the people, came straight from the work that we've been about. It came straight from good research and connecting across the country. It's the set of proposals that should have given the Senate lots to choose from in terms of, what can we move today? What can we do? And in fact, they chose instead to walk away from the conversation. So I think part of today, Chair Moran, is, for both folks to ask questions about, I think, those provisions, but also to have a conversation about how they feel about them. And then also, what do we do? What do we do as next steps in order to get something moving, behind legislation? Because as you noted, I think it was Becker Finn, or St. Becker Finn noted, lots of other states have already moved and have done actually some pretty strong stuff, in the last week or two. So I'll stop there, and I'll take your direction, Chair Moran, in terms of how you want to proceed from here.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. Do we have any questions? To Representative Jay Zong or Mapu Noah, I know you guys are monitoring the questions that may come in. Is there any questions that
Chair Moran, I think there was a question in the chat.
In the chat? Let's see.
The question is, they just want a copy of the Police Accountability Act, which is available online. I will post it on here.
Is that the question in the chat?
Chip.
Okay.
Chair Moran.
Yes.
I think the question came from Peng Shong. So that was the question in the chat that we have. If Peng Shong wanted to address that issue, I'll appreciate it. She's here with us in Zoom.
Go ahead, Payne. Payne, you want to ask your question? Okay, so she's just coming. So let me just read it. She said, I am a community member that have been affected personally by inappropriate and excessive use of force, authority after asking for an officer name and badge and card. I lived and grew up in the Falltown Rondo neighborhood where these incidents and many of the incidents with immediate family happened. How will you ensure that our communities are educated on know your rights and are empowered to call out inappropriate and excessive use of authority and force? Yeah, so Representative Zong did state that he will place some information about, so community members can have information about know your rights. And for us, Payne, one of the things as legislators that we've like been calling out, and one, it began immediately after we saw the killing, the murder of George Floyd, and then immediately stating that we have to move some accountability bills. We have to have policies in place that does not, that will protect individuals when excessive abuse is used. Because currently in the law, there's a process that never ever gets to a real clear resolution. And that accountability piece is missing. And so the bills that you see before you will strengthen that accountability piece. You know, often, you know, an officer may be fired, but he also has to go through arbitration. He has to go through negotiation. He has to go through a process. And sometimes the process that's currently in laws will reverse that dismissal, and that officer will find himself, you know, still maintaining his license, still maintaining his ability to patrol the streets, still maintain his ability to be a law officer. So we have bills that deals with arbitrations. We have which would be that entity that has been protecting officers. And so as you just look through the many different provisions that we have put forward in the House that really exceeds what we see coming from the Republicans, that really has no accountability in place. Just trying to kicks it down the road a little bit. That is our advocacy. That is our us raising our voices, because we know laws and policies matter. And if laws and policies are not in place to correct behavior, those behaviors continue to happen. But anyone else who would like to respond to that, please do.
I'd like to add a few thoughts really quickly. First of all, I want to thank Peg for the question. It's a really good question, and frankly, it's not one that we focused on in terms of this first wave of legislation, but it's one that I'm certainly jotting down. Similar to when we had the town hall meetings with community members and a hearing, we kept receiving all sorts of ideas. And so this idea about how do we strengthen what's the state role in strengthening the ability of the citizens, of the residents of Minnesota, to know what their rights are. You know, like most people don't know that an officer has to give you his or her card with their name on it. So knowing your rights is one way in which you can not only have a redress later, but it's also a way for you to be able to assert yourself, probably in a way where you can slow down and not stop, the behavior in front of you. Let me just say this: there's over 500 law enforcement, local law enforcement agencies in the state. Law enforcement is primarily a local function. So it's going to be your county, it's going to be your city, it's going to be your township. It's not going to be your state. And one of the things that's weak, I think, in our state is that, their authority comes from the state. And the state should be using that fact in order to hold them accountable. In order to hold them accountable, we need to know what's going on. And one way we can find out what's going on is we can mandate what kind of data they send to us so that we can analyze it and we can look at the state and say, whoa, wait a minute. You got a guy named Chauvin in your police department that has 17, 20, complaints against him and never anything's happened. That's the work that the state should be doing because we license those departments and that individual. But the other way is for what Pang, I think, is suggesting here, which is what should be the relationship between individuals and the state relative to when bad things happen, when their rights are being violated. And I think part of that relationship is that we should be, as a state, finding ways to clearly communicate and share, make available for all residents, what their rights are. I would also say that that's also the duty and the responsibility of your local police department to share that as well. And so it can begin with a call, as simple to your, nothing's ever simple, but it could begin with a call to your local police department and ask them, do you have the rights of citizens relative to law enforcement? Where can I find that? Can you send that to me? Is that posted? And their answer is going to tell you a lot about their seriousness of having a decent relationship, with their communities. So, but Pang, you've given me some good stuff to think about in terms of, what could be next wave of legislation to add to the table. And I do think this idea of how does the state help to strengthen the ability of citizens and residents to know what their rights are relative to law enforcement is a really good idea.
Okay, the next question is from Facebook, Renita Fisher. Her question is, there is a sustainability gap in local law enforcement training to address racial bias and lack of diverse police officers serving communities where I live, Burnsville. Are there provisions in the legislation to address this as part of accountability?
I could make a stab unless somebody else wants to. Quite frankly, it's our position that our training system is incredibly flawed. There's pretty minimal standards that are established for who provides the training, what's the quality and the nature of the training, how is it informed. It's not that there's nothing there. It's that there's a lack of rigor accompanied by that. And particularly when it comes to issues of race relations, of implicit bias, of cross-cultural understandings, et cetera. So right now, basically, and by the way, let me back up a little bit. Most training is not done or paid for by the state. The bulk of training is going to happen because of decisions at the local police department or police unit or a law enforcement unit, your sheriff or whatever. They're going to use resources from your property taxes, essentially. So it's local resources to pay for the training of their licensed officers. The state only recently got into the business of training, and they did so after the killing of Philando Castillo. And so now the state puts in about $6 million a year into training that's targeted for advancing knowledge and skills around implicit bias, around de-escalation, and then around handling, interacting in situations where there are mental health issues and challenges. It all sounds great, except that it's basically, from my perspective anyway, it's basically money just out the door to the locals and say, go do this. We're never going to ask you what the quality of that is. We're never going to ask you whether your officers have actually learned something. We're never going to ask you whether they're applying what they learned. It's just money out the door to do good things. It's an incredibly weak design. It's a design that's set up for abuse. It pretty much allows anyone to offer that kind of training, whether or not they have knowledge of implicit bias or not. So it's really open to gaming, and it's a really, in my opinion, a waste of the people's resources, and a very important thing, because training is important. We don't think that training is the only thing. Arguably Chauvin over the years has been quote unquote properly trained and probably received the training that flowed out of the Philando Castile killing. That certainly didn't stop him from doing what he did. Changing behaviors and habits isn't a one and done thing. You don't train for, an hour or a day even around implicit bias and expect that the individual's behavior is going to change relative to their biases and racist attitudes out in general society. You got to build habits. You have to provide the information. You have to monitor. You have to provide it again. You have to provide it again. You have to provide it again. This is just simple social science. And so that's what we don't have. We have an incredibly weak training philosophy and design in our state. Even the post-sport leadership is saying that. They're saying, because there's new leadership there now, and they're saying, look, that's not how other states do this. That's not the direction that we should be going. We should be using social science to inform how do we actually have training that's truly meaningful. On the diversity, very quickly, we don't have a diverse police department anywhere. And there are monies that have been put into trying to diversify. Even the state pops in, a small amount, $400,000. It has not moved the needle at all in terms of the number of Black officers, of Latino officers, Asian officers in any meaningful sense. And so that is also a huge, big challenge. There's nothing in our bill, unlike training, there's nothing in our bill that right now anyway that addresses that issue.
Yeah, I would just like to say we have spent millions of dollars for training. We have done that, and I think training is good. I'm not saying it's not good, but I think one of the things we also have to do is that, officers have been trained, but their behavior still shows up. So it has to be some accountability pieces put in place when they do things that are unlawful. I think I would like to open it up and let,
Can I add something, Rena?
I'm going to pass it over to you, Adon. So
Okay,
talk about your residency bill. Yes.
Thank you. So that was a very good question. And I'm one of those people that are against training funding for police. We in Minneapolis have done a lot of training since Jamar Clark and Philando Castillo. There has been so many training and so many fundings that we put into training, but nothing has changed. One of the things that we're doing with this accountability legislation is to require police to live in the communities that they serve. Maybe having relationship with the community that you serve, seeing your police officer at the grocery store, at your church or your mosque or your synagogue, at the gas station, at the local workout place that you work at will make a difference. We don't know that, but having a relationship may make a difference. And then the thing about diversity officers is that I don't think, unless we change the police mentality of there's a threat, we have to eliminate the threat. And the threat happens to be a lot of times a Black man. Other times it's a Black woman or other, communities of color or indigenous community, but a lot of times it's a Black man. There were two Black men who were present at, George Floyd's, when George Floyd was gasping for air and saying, "I can't breathe." So having a diversity in police may not change a whole lot unless we change the police culture, the way police is trained, the way police sees, communities of color, interact with communities of color, the way that the whole mentality of police, unless we change that, I don't think having a diverse police, department helps with anything. Also having a relationship with the communities that they're serving and knowing whose kid it is that's causing trouble. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember back in the days when police officers used to walk the beat, where they was connected, and when something happened, they would go and knock on someone's door and said, you know, Mrs. Jones, here is Johnny. This is what Johnny done. Right now, we have a path where police are, you know, picking up our youth and other folks for sometimes minor infractions, and they just put them towards a pathway of juvenile detention, or, you know, a path of, you know, creating a record that may follow them for the rest of their lives. We can police and we can do this work differently, and that's what we're trying to do at the legislature. Do this work differently, see how it's done differently in other ways, but also doing it in partnership with the police with the police department. And so when you look at the bills that we have introduced, we are focusing on the structural piece. There are systemic changes that needs to happen. There are institutional changes that needs to happen within the department that leads to the accountability pieces that we want, that will lead to preventing police brutality. We have to get to the root causes of what we're seeing happening. And I agree with Representative Hassan that the piece around that, until we change the culture of how policing is done through this warrior type of mentality, that citizens, American citizens, those who live in our community, people who live in a community are the enemy, and they are responding to them in that type of way. We think that we can do better than that. Let's see, I have another question here from Sandra Castro Pearson that says, what else can we do beyond protesting if we have representatives and senators in our district that are already supportive of this legislation? How do we reach those in districts with senators that oppose, and explain why this is needed in our diverse neighborhood? Very, very good question, Sandra. Did you guys get that question? What else can we do beyond protesting if we have representatives and senators in our district that already support this legislation? And how do we reach those in districts with senators that oppose, and explain why this is needed in our diverse neighborhoods? Anyone like to speak to that? Representative Bakerfield?
Yeah, so first of all, we all get a lot of really negative feedback from folks on the other side of this issue. So, you know, it's always a good idea, I think, to also like make sure that your elected, you know, whether it's your city council, your mayor, your legislators, that they know where you stand, because it helps us to it helps give us the fuel to fight harder and to keep fighting for this stuff when we hear from all of you. And then we also hear from folks who don't live in our district. So I think you absolutely can contact Senator Limmer and Senator Gazelka, leave them voicemails, send them emails. And if you have friends or family or connections in districts that don't have legislators that are supportive of this kind of work, you know, you can help out in those communities to make sure that they are having their voices heard, and that you know, maybe it is helping folks in that community to find someone who better represents them. And so I think, you know, all of that energy can go towards that, even if you know, even if you live in one of our districts. I also would encourage folks to look at their city councils. I know, you know, I represent some suburban communities, cities of Vadnais Heights, Little Canada, Roseville, Shoreview, Gem Lake, and several of those cities have people on their city councils who are not supportive of this work that we're doing, and, you know, are really living in the past. So I think there's a lot that can be done in that area on a super local level as well. But you know, after George Floyd was killed, many of us got thousands and thousands of voicemails and emails from people all over the country who wanted to make sure we were going to do the right thing. And so I think it's absolutely fine, even if it's somebody who doesn't represent you, they're still taking votes that impact all of Minnesota. So feel free to fill up their voicemail boxes and send them emails and let them know how important this is to you.
Thank you so much. That is so correct. I have a similar question from Manny Munson Regala, which is how do we get the Senate to negotiate in good faith? Or should we get a new Senate or both? Well, I would say all of that. What I can share with you is that the House moved this bill through the body, and we did it in like really good record time, because the Senate Republicans were threatening us that they was going to sine die, which means they was going to end session on Friday, June the 19th. I think it was 1 week into the special session, and they were saying we're leaving, we're going. And so we moved this bill off the House floor. It has to go through several different committees. We did that, as Representative Carlos Mariani talked about. Passed off the House floor on the Wednesday before that Friday. We went before the Senate to negotiate on Friday. So they called us in and said they wanted to negotiate. When we got there, they said to us, we have not read the bill. We have not even read the bill. I mean, that's like really a slap in the face to us. You know, they've been around for a very long time, and they know by the time we get to negotiations, they should have been read those bills. That's truly a disrespect and a devaluing of us as people of color, as legislators of color, to come before them and they say to us, we have not even read the bill. We then went in for a second conversation with the Senate in hope of negotiating with them. And what they did is they shared with us a list of what they could support and said to us, this is our final, what's the word? This is our final request or statement around these bills. Not only was it the final, but it was the first time we had seen any type of bills or language to a bill that they would support, which again is like very disrespectful to us. It's kind of like they told us, you take it or leave it. You take it or leave it. This is our offer, you know, and we've seen that type of behavior before. And so trying to get the Republicans, and then at the end of the week, what do they do? As we sat and took their offers and said, well, we're not going to just take it. We're not going to just leave it, but we will go back and look at it. And we came back with a counter offer on Friday. They took our offer, didn't say much, and we waited around for hours into Saturday morning. They did not have the respect to come back and say to us, we haven't made a decision. Maybe we'll think about it. Maybe we need to negotiate a little bit longer. They totally dismissed us, not just as legislators, but legislators of color, and did not have the respect to even give us a response, and they sine die. They left and went back home to their communities. So that's where we are with the process with the senators, who have just kind of like said to us as legislative colors that we don't see your community and that doesn't matter to us. The centuries of this type of behavior does not matter to us. We're going home. And so we really need the community help. We really need your help. We need folks from across the state who are out protesting from all different backgrounds and colors and different creeds, you know, including our white allies, men, women, youth, who stood up and said, this is wrong. This is wrong in the 21st century. This is not the path, and it is not okay. And so we need your help. We need your help as you look at the bills that we put forward. We need your help as you look to see that the Senate doesn't seem to know how to negotiate in good faith or what that looks like. And so, as Representative Jamie Becker-Finn said, make a phone call. Let's organize. Let's keep this at the forefront. They're trying to change the narrative. Police showing up with bad behavior, using excessive force, using chokeholds, that is really blocking an individual airway, is not okay. There has to be consequences for that. And so I would stop there. And we're definitely open to community to helping us decide how we need to go forward, how these bills that we're working on, what you expect us to do with these bills. Is it okay for us to take, a Republican who seemed to not be able to negotiate in good faith and just walk away from the table? Or do we walk away with something that we believe is going to help to be systemic and be transformative, that's going to keep them accountable? Yes, we're dealing with a Republican legislature, so we have to negotiate. It won't be all our way, nor should it be all their way. We have to negotiate. That's the process that we use in a legislative body. So we're coming for your input. We want to hear from you.
Chair Moran, can I add something
Yes.
to that? I want to thank everyone who has joined us today, but I also want to encourage them to talk to us, because this conversation is supposed to be about us listening to the community. I will say that the Senate doesn't even respect the POCI caucus enough to come back and tell us what they think of our offer. If we hear from the community and the community gives us a benchmark of what we need to fight with and to die with, we will definitely do that. But this conversation is supposed to be highlighting that. What does police accountability look like to you? The document that we just shared, is that enough? Is that much? Do we want more? Do we want less? So I think that for the people that are watching, please give us your input, because we need to be fighting alongside with you, and we want to make sure that this conversation, whatever we're fighting on, at the end of the day, what the outcome is our community's voices are the front, the center, and the back. And we want to make sure that the final outcome is something that you are happy with and that we can take home. So please give us your input. Talk to us.
So I have a statement, or maybe a question. A question or a statement from Allison. I'm going to mess your name up, Allison, so forgive me. Heebish, Heebsh. She says, I've seen the idea of requiring officers to maintain professional liability insurance with the baseline level paid by the employer and any additional premiums for a high-risk officer paid by the officer. Is this included in the bill? It would make it financially untenable for dangerous officers to remain in the profession. I have carried that bill before, Allison. And when I carried it a few years back, of course, at that time, the Republicans had the majority in the House and in the Senate. And so that bill alone did not go anywhere. But I agree, there has to be ways to stop the behavior that we see from dead police officers. And we recognize not all police officers are not dead, but if you are a doctor and you commit malpractice, there are consequences to that. We don't just continue to let you operate on individuals, right? And so just like any other profession, any other professional in all other professions, there are boundaries. There are consequences to behavior. And we're just asking for that same type of responsibility, accountability, protections from our police, from our law enforcement. Let's weed out the bad guys. Let's remove the bad guys out the way so that we can have a different culture and maintain a different type of relationship from my police officers. So Allison, thank you for that question. Anyone else want to respond to the liability insurance piece? Let's see here. You know what I would like, if a representative Her, are you on the call? Can you talk a little bit about your arbitration bill?
Yeah, I'm on the line. I can talk a little bit about it. So
Yeah.
the arbitration bill is, and I don't want to say too much, Mina, because I know that I don't know how much time we have, but I really want to give opportunity for people to ask.
We have about an hour left, so we're good.
So it really does go to address some of the systemic problems that we have within the police structure and why bad officers who continue to have infractions continue to hold their jobs. So we have a system in place in which officers, a chief can fire an officer for misconduct, but until the infraction goes through arbitration, the firing is not binding. And so what happens is, right now in the current arbitration process, the employer and the employee all get together, and there's 7 people presented to them, and then they get to each strike out a person until they get to the one last arbitrator. And what ends up happening is they look at the record of the arbitrator, and then they decide, like, if you're the cop, you say, well, I don't want arbitrator number 7 because that person 70% of the time sides with the employer. And then the employer does the exact same thing, and who's left at the end is the person who has done their best and always just kind of going down the middle 50-50. And I think that sometimes people think, well, 50-50 is fair, but it is actually not, because if the case shows us that an individual actually should be disciplined or fired, somebody who sort of stays in the middle, that person keeps getting jobs, and that person's not actually looking at the facts of the case and saying, like, this person used excessive force, like they shouldn't be a police officer. And so we keep putting into this system in which those who continually have judgments that are very sort of down the line are the ones who keep getting picked. And so they have a financial incentive to keep siding that way in order for them to keep getting picked. And so with our new process, we're saying we're not doing that anymore. What we're going to do is create a new arbitrator pool, a new arbitrator process in which these arbitrators only work on police discipline issues. These arbitrators are not provided, you don't get to choose the arbitrator, they are randomly selected from this pool. And you don't get to look at their record before they get chosen. And so what we're hoping is that that takes out the financial incentive for an arbitrator to not side one way or the other too often. We get rid of the random factor, because nobody else in any system gets to choose their judges, who gets to make a decision for them in their own personal cases. That never happens. And so we're saying that can't happen within this situation either. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do with this system. And there's still much that we need to do to it, but we also want to be really thoughtful about the impact this has on labor agreements and labor laws, because many people who look like us, right, people of color, need the protection of unions, because oftentimes there are also structures and institutions which prevent those of us who may not be treated fairly at work, that we need the protection of the union and the labor laws to do that. And so we're trying to sort of walk the fine line of how do we change the structure, but how do we actually make it more fair and to really just address the issues within police that we're experiencing. So that's kind of where we are with that.
Thank you so much, Representative Cowley. I know we have got public members who wanted to participate in the process, so I wanted to invite Taryn Vang to speak about his experience. Taryn, go ahead, please. Oh, her experience, sorry.
You're muted, Taryn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taryn Vang. Thank you so much for letting me speak today. My name is Taryn Vang. My boyfriend, Travis Jordan, was murdered by the Minneapolis Police Department, the 4th Precinct, on November 9th, 2018. He was murdered by 2 white rookie cops. Their names are Neil Walsh and Ryan Keys. He was shot 8 times. I called 311 in the hopes of reaching someone that could possibly like de-escalate the situation. He was having a mental health crisis. He was having suicidal ideation. So when I called 311, I was directed to 911, and that was when the police officers came out to like assess the situation. So when they got there, he was inside his house. He was okay. Like when you do a wellness check, you want to make sure that they are well and alive. He was well and alive in his house. He was taunted like by the police officers, like they were banging on the kitchen window, telling him to come out, come out, come out. And when he finally took a few steps in their direction, they shot at him 8 times. This is a situation that I believe could have been avoided. He would still be alive today. He would be able to rehabilitate and live a fulfilling life if there was a co-responder program in place. That is something that I am really pushing for. And yeah, it wasn't until after his death that Minneapolis decided to have a co-responder program in place. It was already in place in the rest of Minneapolis, except the 4th precinct, which is the most vulnerable and underserved community in Minneapolis. So it wasn't until after his death that City Council voted to have the co-responder program in place. Why does someone have to die for there to be a co-responder program in place? We need people who are trained in de-escalating situations to come out to all these people that are calling for help. I think it was like 42% of phone calls that are made are for people who are suffering mental health crises. So we really need a co-responder program in place. I really believe that he would still be alive today if it were in place. The 4th precinct was the same precinct that killed Jamar Clark, killed Cheshire Vu. They are deadly, and that's just something that I'm really pushing for, because there are so many people, like there's no one to call. Like you call the 911, but you get 2 rookie cops who couldn't even save his life. De-escalation can take many hours. Why could you not stay in your car and let him calm down? Why could you not have tasered him instead? Why did you have to take away his life? And then I also wanted to mention about the statute of limitations for charging up for wrongful death. Right now, it's only 3 years, and that is something that me and all the families, there's about 20 families that we are working with right now. And there are some cases that are 20 years old and they are still not able to get justice. It would be great for there to be no statute of limitations, because right now, even for Travis Jordan, just 2 weeks ago, we got his medical records back. It took 2 weeks. It's been a year and a half. Now we only have another year and a half to gather all the information if we want to pursue a case. They still have not given us back his notebook or like his bracelet. We did not want them to have any belongings of his, and it has been really hard trying to fight for his belongings back. It is also known that the Minneapolis 4th precinct is known for taking tokens of people they have murdered. So we want those items back. We need help getting it back. And then I also wanted to mention, you guys were talking about having officers that work in your community. There has actually been no studies to show that that data is correct. Like if you live in that city, it would be better if the police officers lived in that city, because they would know the community and know who they are protecting and serving. That is not correct. If you want more information, you can always reach out to Michelle Gross at CUAPB. They have compiled a list of things of that sort. And just to say, victims, like families of loved ones who have lost someone to police brutality, we do not want to be surrounded by the officers who killed our loved ones. For example, Matilda Smith, her son Jafford Smith, was killed in St. Paul. He was shot more than 50 times. She has a police officer that lives in her apartment building, the same officer that killed her son. She is traumatized every day, and there is nothing to do in order to help her. She would have to move. She does not have the funds to move. So that is something that I would really like you guys to look into. For example, in Chicago, there are rules like that in place where you have to live in the city that you are serving, but still Chicago is one of the deadliest police forces too. So thank you for listening. I think that is all I have to say. Thank you so much.
So first, I just want to say I am so sorry for your loss. This is one of the reasons that we are fighting at the Capitol to change the laws and policies that are in place, right? Because you are absolutely right. That is no reason why we can't be stronger in, police officers cannot be stronger in the practice of de-escalation. And my use of force bill goes to that point about de-escalation. And it's a bill that I'm gonna give you the language that I have in front of me. What it does is it shifts from the very low burden in statute when deadly force is justified by law enforcement, meaning that currently in law, we have a practice that says that, I talked about police officers seeing members of our community as the enemy, but they also lack a sense of humanity. And so the use of force law brings in the sanctity of life. Because right now, the current law is so subjective that an officer can say something as simple as, I fear for my life, or I believe that person was going to hurt me, or I believe that that child who was holding something in his hand, that it was a gun, or I fear for my life. And we want to move from that type of practice into a practice that is geared and focused in the sanctity of life, that puts the burden on, that it's not a burden, but instead prioritize and what would a reasonable officer do, using and recognizing the totality of what is happening in front of him. And clearly your loved one was not a threat to them, and they did not take into consideration that they needed to back off. Maybe they needed to bring in a mental health professional. Maybe they were not the one that needed to be there, and you did the right thing by calling 311. Absolutely. And so, you also talked about the statute of limitation. It's one of my bills that I know Representative Samantha Vega is carrying. She can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And you're right. There's really no data. It's talks that that has been collected, but we know they don't collect data anyway. So we don't really know whether or not if officers living in the community makes a difference, because I know my Republican colleagues who don't live in the urban core believes that, they have some of the best relationship of officers who live in their community, who know them, who are a part of that community. They grew up together. Their kids go to school together. They go to church together. We don't have that leisure. And if we're changing the practice of how you are engaging with our community member, the hope and the wish is that we will have less deadly encounters, because there are accountability pieces in place. So we don't want to look at the place that we are right now. We want to look to the future, what we want. And so that is why we're bringing these bills forward. That is why we know we have to have accountability pieces in places. That is why we know we have to stop police brutality, because the lack of humane that seems to be happening with police officers as they sometimes are encountering individuals in our community, often they are people of color, it's that lack of humanity, or that lack of believing in the sanctity of life. I'm going to stop there so that Representative Vane can talk about her bill in regards to the statute of limitations.
Thank you, Chair Moran, and thank you, Taryn, for sharing your story. You and families like you have been shouldering the pain and this injustice for far too long, and you're still shouldering the burden. And to have it, and thank you so much for sharing your story, and to, you know, I don't know, I can't imagine the pain that you all are going through to keep re-triggering and reliving those moments, you know, after every time someone has been unjustly, wrongfully killed by police. So, you know, to help allow some pathway towards justice for families like you and Taryn, I'm chief author of the House File 48, moving the statute of limitations for wrongful death and other like sexual assault and other injuries by a police officer. Currently, as you all may know, it's 3 years, and many families have shared their story that police have prolonged the investigations to time out the statute of limitations so that families can't file a civil lawsuit against the police officer for wrongful death. And so my bill repeals that limitation. And unfortunately, and it is to no surprise that the Senate Republicans have failed to respond to you all and to us about what they think about the bill and whether they're supportive of it or not. They haven't responded at all, and it's unfortunately to no surprise they're not willing to work with us. So we definitely need to continue to push, and we will continue to work on it. This is top of mind of ours, and you know, we hear you, and we'll keep going for as long as we need to.
Thank you. So, you know, those are really hard stories to hear, especially when we know there could have been a different outcome. It is really painful, and it happens way too often. And so there are things that we need. There are provisions, there are laws, there are policies that we need to work on. But as Representative Vega has said, that the Republicans are unwilling to work with us. They have been unwilling to come to the table, and still today we have not heard from them. I have a question from Miriam Harris, who says, when can the bills be introduced? They have all been introduced, Miriam. They have passed off the House floor. We went into negotiation, and the Republicans walked away from the table without any response to us. Any discussions underway for the governor to consider taking executive action on any key pieces of legislation?
Representative Moran, I think on Miriam's question, so the current we're not in session right now. So whenever the next session is called, either a special session by the governor or a regularly scheduled session in January, we can reintroduce basically anything at that point, but we have to technically be in session in order to do that. So right now, because the special session we were in last week adjourned, there's currently no bills that are actually active out there. So what we're doing now is we're discussing what had been passed off the floor in the hopes that when we reconvene, that we will be able to reintroduce something that we can move forward, that the community can be supportive of, knowing, you know, where the Republicans are at. So that's, and I think her comment may have been back at a previous discussion about the professional liability insurance or some kind of insurance for officers, and that could definitely be reintroduced at any point. So just a little more context for that, because there are a lot of sort of rules in the system, but we can introduce anything we want essentially once we're back in session.
And let me just go ahead.
That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be discussions, right? I mean, we have discussions. And in fact, the speaker is trying to knock on all sorts of doors to get senators to talk with us. I know Chair Moran, you've been in constant communication with her about that. I have been as well. She's looking for other individuals to, to be intermediaries. That's just going nowhere at this point. But, we certainly owe it to everybody to just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And ideally, if we have a conversation before session starts, we might be able to wrap up, some sort of agreement. That means once we're in session, then we can move, as Jamie just shared, we would introduce those bills where people have all this big agreement, and then we can move them pretty quickly. So that's what we're trying to do. But it's hard to do that, with, one side that, frankly doesn't want to do anything at this point. And then on the executive, the other question had to do with the governor's executive action. The governor is exploring through administrative ways to be able to move some of the things. I mean, some things that we have on the table just is plain out going to require legislation. You can't write statutory law, but there's administrative law that acts within the frame of statutory law. And there are entities like the Post Board, the Peace Officer Standards Training Board, which has all the licensing power. There's room for them in that board to be able to do certain things that move in our direction, like say change the conditions for use of force, relative to the use of chokeholds, for instance. Work on aspects of duty to intercede. They are exploring that. The governor is pushing, that board and other, departments to fully explore, what they can do. I mean, ideally, we want law. Rather, we want statutory law. We want legislation. But sometimes, just like with the sentencing guidelines, where we couldn't get a law to cap probation at 5 years because, again, the Senate wouldn't even have the conversation. There was a Sentencing Guideline Commission that had the administrative power to do that, and they did that. So it's a great question. There are efforts, underway for administrative law at the same time that the POCI Caucus, our speaker, is doing everything we can to reach out to the senators, even though they've rebuffed us and treated us, quite frankly, pretty badly. Our duty is nonetheless, to keep pushing any way that we can. And so that's happening right now. And as Jamie said, when we go back in session, these bills would then have to be reintroduced and go through the same, probably faster, but same process in order to get it off the floor of the House for eventual action with the Senate.
And let me just also say that, Minnesotans across the state have been protesting, marching, sending emails about their outrage about where we are right now with the George Floyd and all the other George Floyds have been murdered. As Tyron has just said, her loved one has been murdered, killed by a police officer. We have heard from the governor and lieutenant governor many times in support of our bills that we're moving forward in the House. And they have been working, to elevate the urgency of now. And so, yes, they would have to be reintroduced, but if the Senate had any faith of heart about hearing the voice and the cries of our communities and so many other communities around the country, in the world, they would step up and do the right thing, and that would be not wait until a new session that happens in January of 2021, but do the right thing and come forth, because there are there are sheriffs. I think it's 81 sheriffs of the 87 sheriffs around these counties who support some of the provisions within these bills. There are county attorneys that are supporting some of these bills and these provisions. We can do something, and we can do something now, but it takes them to come to the table in good faith. It takes them to see us. It takes them to see the humanity in our communities. It takes them to say that racism is real, and we have systemic racism embedded in our institutions. So they need to be able to move out of their privilege and see us and hear our cries and hear our pains and validate that we mean something. And so we're going to keep pushing, we're going to keep fighting. And yes, you know, we have to work hard to make sure that there are people who are in office that cares about the values and the things that we care about. I have another question here, and that question was from Renita about the governor, from Elizabeth Lee. She said, not only does the BCA needs to take reports and investigate law enforcement officer accused of sexual assault, but the statute of limitation also must be passed while such a case must be paused while such a case is being investigated by any governmental agency, whether it's the BCA, the EEOC, the Post, etc. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions. We have Carl Johnson who would also like to share his story. Carl, can you share your story in about 5 to 10 minutes?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Well, it's a story that has happened recently. So I grew up in what I call post Jim Crow Atlanta. So there's a lot of fear around living in Minnesota right now from families and individuals. But there was an officer who came to a rally to harass a family. And he's come to more than one rallies at the governor's mansion. And even some of us have reached out to council members and even Todd Axel. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, where are the boundaries for these things? Even though we do have a bill, like, what would be some accountability boundaries that he could put in place that they could not terrorize victims in our communities? Like, it was heartbreaking for me to see this police officer just like nonchalantly, who know he was involved, like being at a rally and to harass people and to cause more problems. And so it's just a hard place for me. I think as I see what's happening in Minneapolis, I feel like St. Paul feels like they're off limits. I just really feel like that. And so I'm a pastor. I pastor church. I pastor people. Sorry for anybody watching, trying not to get emotional in this. But it's heartbreaking. It's more than racism, and it's a system, I'm just going to say a system of white supremacy, and it's being upheld through our senators because they don't have to deal with it every day. And so my main question is, in this bill, how can we protect people from these police officers so that they don't get to do the harassment that they say is on their job? Like, that's a hard place. There's stories of him showing up at a workplace. There's stories of him sitting outside her house. There's stories of him just showing up to the rally. Like, there's many stories and instances and videos of him just being there. And so, like, there has to be some protection of people. And so I really would like to see I don't know if you guys, I know we're in special sessions, and I am just seeing some of these senators, like you said, who go to church. I've been to church with some of them, and they've asked for prayer. And I just, right now, I don't want to compromise on that. And like say right now that I would like to see what can happen. How can we call a special session for our community? Not for a policy, but for our community. Our community needs some justice and some answers, like right now.
Anybody want to take that? I hear you about the intimidation piece, right? We heard Terrence say the same. Someone else just talked about the intimidation piece.
Moran, this is Kali. I just and I really appreciate that last comment by Pastor Johnson. I wanted you to know that I think that discussion has been sort of separating Minneapolis and St. Paul, and you're absolutely right that St. Paul has the exact same issues around police, and that I think that we have to do a better job. And the mayor has also gotten this feedback in that, like, St. Paul has to, even though this didn't happen in our city, we need to do better because we experience all the same issues. And to be honest with you, I struggle with really finding out what the right answer for us to do is. I've been in a huge fight with Republicans over Representative Lee and my bill around trying to establish an institution, an organization that is led by people of color, decisions are made by people of color, that we're going to give grants to people, to organizations that have primarily people of color or is led by a person of color. And just the blowback of all of the cries of, reverse racism and being unfair. And I just thought to myself, like, I was angry at first, but then I thought, how can I ask a bunch of people who don't even buy into the fact that the systemic and structural racism is true and it exists in all of our institutions. And the minute we try to do one thing to change that structure to be different, we are getting this huge blowback. And I'm really struggling about what it means that we're not just passing bills. We are literally fighting to change the structures that we operate within. And I hear you. And I wish that if maybe this is a conversation for another day, but that when we have the opportunity to all gather again to say, like, what are the ways in which we all have to work together to dismantle structurally what is happening within the legislature, so that we can even get to the work of like passing bills, right? Like, so I have no good answers for you. I hear you about needing for us to come back together for a special session because people of color, like, we need us to like convene to do something, right? And so I would love for us to maybe in another day or another time be able to really talk honestly about what we see and what we encounter within the legislature. And what does that mean to have a deliberate call to action about what it means for our partners to push from the outside, while those of us who are on the inside are trying to dismantle from the inside. And so I know that's not a good answer. It's probably not what you're looking for, but I know that this is an ongoing problem that we really need to look at and look beyond the policies that are happening right now. And so I appreciate you bringing that up and knowing that you are all seeing what we are seeing and you are all wanting to have answers, and that we can work together and try to figure out where this needs to go for our next steps of how we do this.
Yep, thank you, Representative Hearn. Well said. So I have maybe a statement here from Cedric, who says, in regards to the post board and giving the post board the authority to investigate misconduct allegation immediately and suspend and revoke licenses regardless of what the employer does or what the outcome of the arbitration is. Because officers are required to have a license. If the license is taken away, this will eliminate the ability of the officer to bounce around from one city to the next. The post could also be the repository of misconduct data on officers. And I know, Representative Mariani, this is your bill, but the post board needs some reform in itself. It needs mechanisms to be put in place. But I would take it over to Representative Mariani to kind of like explain what the board is in maybe 5 minutes, 5 or 7 minutes about where we are with the post board in your bill.
Yeah, it's a great question, Representative Moran, and a great vision. As I said earlier, many of us believe the post board is intentionally being underused. We can certainly strengthen it, but even with its current powers, it's just not rising to the occasion before us. Much of the data about individual police officer behavior is public data. You can go to any police department. Now, whether they'll turn it over to you in time and all those issues is another issue, but law says that information around complaints and discipline actions, especially under use of force, is public data. And so what our bill does is it would funnel all that data to the Pulse board in a way that would then allow the Pulse to do some really strong analysis of that data to identify patterns of behaviors and to try to intervene earlier. And then also to identify where there's egregious things that nobody's doing anything about, and do what Cedric is suggesting, actually discipline from the place of the Pulse board. And so the way we do that is that we create a console within the Pulse board itself. We would add 4 more civilians to the Pulse board. It's dominated by law enforcement types, some who really do want reform, but quite frankly, most who are either afraid or have just been totally resistant. So we would add 4 more civilians to the Pulse board itself. We would create a council within the Pulse board that would have 5 law enforcement representatives in it, 4 representatives from the 4 state councils of color and Indian Affairs Council, and then 6 individuals from advocacy groups from across the state, including advocates for survivors of sexual assault. And so you would have a really strongly balanced council. That council would review that data and then make recommendations to the board around changing licensing and policy. But, and here's the strong thing, also tell the board, you got to discipline this person. You have to discipline this department. And you need to use your licensing power to do it. The bill has some other really important detail in it because there's capacity issues. It would also fund a community-based research group, so an independent analyzer to actually do the analysis for that council in order for the council to make the decisions going forward. So it really is about taking the existing power of that board and having it exercise it, and having it exercise it by creating these structures inside of it. So I think Cedric is right that if we're going to depend solely on individual local police units to properly discipline, control, shape good behavior on the part of their police officers, I think the proof is in the pudding. It ain't happening, And so the point is, how do we then create a pressure behind the fact that the state is the only body that can license both the departments and the individuals to press them. And then the final thing is, and this goes to Ayesha Gomez's bill, the citizen review councils. We haven't talked about that. That's really pretty powerful stuff because it's not at the state level, but it's at the local level where you would have these citizen review councils that review, the conduct, behavior, practices of their local peace officers. And this is the more really powerful thing, would have the ability to dismiss police officers. It's incredibly radical. It's incredibly powerful. Of course, all that stuff can always be appealed. People have rights, arbitration and the whole bit. But as Cedric points out, it's one thing to arbitrate over a bad behavior. It may be another thing to say, regardless of whether you were right or wrong bad behavior, you violated your license. And so why should we continue to have you have a license? This is what we talk about among ourselves when we say that we have to stop the gaming of the system on the part of really wily, smart, sneaky individuals like, frankly, Bob Kroll, at the Minneapolis Police Department. They figured out the system. They know how to game it. They know how to play it because it's a weak system. So we have to make it a strong system in order to stop them and then eventually to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Representative Mariani. Let's see. We have another, let's see, from Allison. I'm not sure if I read this one, but is the POCI considering pushing for criminal justice reform related to sentencing, cash bail, voting rights in 2021? I would say yes, but someone wants to go deeper. We've done some of this, and we do have bills in regards to the cash bail and the voting rights that was moving through the special session. Carlos, anyone wants to respond to this?
Representative Nora would probably be the best to talk about that cash bail.
Okay, Representative.
Absolutely, and I think we've talked about the criminalization of poverty. The cash bail reform that we introduced is something that is really needed to end that type of criminalization for individuals who are charged with really minor crimes that creates a cycle. People lose their livelihoods. If they cannot pay $75 or even $500, that they can no longer participate in the public as individuals with their freedom. I think their freedom is being taken just simply because they cannot pay $100 or $78. So that's injustice that we see. Quite frankly, anybody who comes to encounter any police officers with minor crimes, they should just get a citation and show up for their hearings rather than spend time which costs $135 a night in county jail just waiting for their trial. So we are fighting hard. Just recently, after the murder of George Floyd, more than $90 million nationwide have been raised to support cash bail to help those who are sitting in jail just waiting for their trial. In fact, some of them, they just end up pleading guilty just simply to walk away from that jail. So I think this is a tool that is being used to over-criminalize people of color and indigenous, Black, brown. So we need to, be able to strategize. We need to mobilize. We need to organize to help those who need justice. And this is changing our criminal justice system, how it functions. And it's our duty, quite frankly, to fight for that justice for all. So I know, Chair Moran, you have the bill to allow people who, denied their voting rights after they have served their time. If you can talk a little bit about the voting rights, that bill that you're carrying. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Noor. So you're right, a restorative vote, which has been around for so long, for many years, as long as I've been in the legislature, trying to give people rights to vote once they are released from prison or jail. So currently in our state that you can commit a crime, serve your time in jail, and when you come out, you're on probation or parole. And as long as you're on probation or parole, you do not have the right to vote. It is our belief that if you have committed a crime and served your time, been incarcerated, away from your family and your community, and paid your dues in prison, in jail, that once you are released, your right to vote should be immediately restored. And it should not be incumbent on whether or not you're on probation or parole. You serve your time, you are back in the community, you're working, you're with your family, you are engaged, and there's no reason that your right to be allowed to vote should be taken away once you're back in the community. There are some states where you never lose your right to vote. Whether you are in prison, you still vote. Most people don't know that if you are sitting in jail, as we were just talking about bail, and you have not been sentenced, you are able to vote. But often that process is not a process that has been utilized within our prison jail system, but you have that right to vote. So to restore your vote is simply that once you are released from incarceration, you're back in the community, your right to vote should be granted. And so we are working on that. We have been fighting for many years. And again, we need a community to stand up and make that a priority too. We definitely need your help in moving just, the cash bill, just a fair and right and justice bill. And so is the voting right. And I know Representative Mariani, you did some work around sentencing guideline. Was that last session in your public safety committee?
Yeah, absolutely. We did a lot of work on, we're working on all these collateral damages. Of course, one of them for many of our incarcerated brothers and sisters is that once they pay their time, they're being stuck, or even in lieu of time, stuck in probation forever, and that meant they couldn't vote. And like I said earlier, if you can't vote, then you can't be part of choosing the public safety and the police department that has incredible power over your life. And so, people pay their price, they admit it, and they do it. They do it honorably. They want to get on with their lives. And yet we're saying, well, yeah, but you can't participate in our democracy anymore, or it's going to take forever for you to participate in our democracy. So it's just it's a contradiction, I think, of everything that we aspire to be, as a freedom-loving people and the people that want to build community. We need our brothers and sisters back in the community with us to build that community.
Let me just say, Carlos, voting, for clarity, is not a privilege, it is a right. Yep. And right. And so it is a right that has been taken away, a 21st century Jim Crow law. All right, Carlos, Mariani. Anything other on the sentencing guideline? I think people on probation, did you move that piece around the sentencing guideline around probation, and that no one gets no more than like 5 years for probation or something like that?
We moved that bill. The Senate rejected it. We want to talk about it.
Once again.
The reality is that the chief author in the Senate was a Republican. Because it was the powerful chair of the tax committee. But in my mind, it just shows you just how intransigent, quite frankly, racism is. That even when you have a powerful Republican who's backing a good idea, that system over there won't allow that to even be heard, much less move. In the end, we didn't get a law, but in the end, the Sentencing Guidelines Commission took the action on its own because it has the power and the authority to do that. And we, the POCI Caucus, put together a letter encouraging the Guidelines Commission to act. We put together a letter prior to that, encouraging the law to be passed. The law wasn't passed, but the Guidelines Commission listened to us and others and enacted. And so right now there's exceptions here, but basically you have a 5-year cap of probation going forward in the state of Minnesota.
Yes. So it's 2:47. There are 2 individuals on the line that would like to share their stories, and stories are so powerful. And so we're going to, if Tashira and Dale Shia, either one of them on the call, on the line. Tashira, Dale Shia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Who's speaking?
Okay, yeah, so it's Tashira and then Delcia. We're both sitting here together. And so I'm going to share my story briefly, and then Delcia can share hers as well.
All right, thank you.
Okay, my son's father and also my fiance, my life partner, was brutally beaten by the St. Paul police and thrown in a trash dumpster in St. Paul. The pictures, if you've seen the pictures of my son's father's body and the way that he was beaten to death, you would be horrified. What they are doing to our people out here in the community is inhumane. My son's father had dog bites all over his body. They bust his skull in half. His head was the size of a basketball laying in his casket. This was a 2009 Emma Till. And it's so many more families out here suffering from these murders that have been covered up by the Minneapolis, the St. Paul police, and all these other police departments. They're killing our people out here. And we have been begging and pleading to be in the rooms with the people that make the laws so our voices can be heard. Anything that you do without including our voices is not the right way. We know the right way to go, and we know what needs to change. I've been living through this for 11 years. The St. Paul police followed me. They sat outside my home. They harassed me, all because I was doing what any normal human being would do, fighting for justice for my loved ones. That's what any human being would do. Because of that, they harassed me. They sat outside my house. They sat outside his mother's home. They followed me. We could not even have a regular funeral because they were swarming up and down the street for the funeral. They wouldn't even let us mourn. They've done everything. They edited the video, which shows the St. Paul police when they caught Justin. They edited the video. So George Floyd's murder is the fate of hundreds, literally hundreds of murders in the state of Minnesota that have been covered up. And the people in the political seats, you guys need to have us at the table. You guys need to listen to us. Our community is out here in pain. We are hurting. They are killing our people. They're killing our people, and they're walking free. These officers are out here to terrorize more people and to terrorize our families. We need you guys to implement us and have our voices at the table when you're making these decisions. There's no way that this should have been allowed to happen in the state of Minnesota, and no one is held accountable. There has been over 428 murders. I have a packet of all of the names in the state of Minnesota in the last 20 years. There has been over 420-something murders, and that's just the people that reported the murders. But I know people personally that have not reported the murders. And there is only one officer in the entire state in history to ever be convicted of killing a civilian, one man, and that is a minority man that killed a Caucasian woman. You mean to tell me out of 428 reported murders, only one man was guilty? We see exactly what is happening here. Everybody sees it. How can the Senate go home and adjourn, knowing that its families out here hurting? They murdered a man on camera, and reform means change. How can you put a change on hold? We need to change immediately because the community is suffering. And it's not just because of one man that the community is suffering. These buildings went on fire because it's pain of hundreds of families. The people that they have murdered have friends. They have families. They have all, that's the community. Friends and families is the community. And it's hundreds of people out here suffering. And George Floyd murder was the straw that broke the camel's back. The community couldn't take it anymore because he is the face. You guys seen a small snippet of hundreds of murders. What you seen when he murdered George Floyd on tape, on camera, was just a small snippet of what we have endured off the cameras or before they got to edit the video. So these cover-ups, literally cover-ups from the BCA. The BCA helps the police cover the murders. Okay, the people that do the autopsies, they will write an autopsy to go along with the police narrative, but they're hiding the truth about what's really happening. I'm afraid for my life. I'm afraid for my son's life because I'm coming out with the truth of all these stories of what's really happening to our people, and they will come after you for this. But I cannot live like this anymore, knowing that they're murdering human beings, putting them in garbages and murdering them on tape, taking their breath from them. I cannot live. I have to fight for what's right. And I'll be quiet after this, but I want to say something to the people in the political seats. One thing I want to say is if you don't have the people that have endured the pain the most at the table when you're making these decisions, whatever you come up with is inadequate. It's not right. You have to do the right thing and incorporate our voices. We have to be a part of the decision making because you can go to school all day long, but a lived experience is what's most important. And also, the one last thing I want to say is please, when I say pick a side, I'm not talking about picking a side of black versus white. I'm not talking about pick a side versus community versus political. I'm saying pick a side of what's right and what's wrong. What they are doing to our community and our people is wrong. Find it in your heart. Let God put your heart enough to fight for the right things. Don't put these bills on hold. Pass the police reform package. That's what we need to make a change, because this is hurting everybody. This is hurting all of us. So pick a side between right and wrong. Put your positions aside. Go beyond your position and do what you know in your heart is the right thing to do for all human beings. We have one race, and it's the human race. Do what's right. That's all I wanted to say, and I'm going to pass it to Ms. Delshia.
Tashira, thank you. We feel your pain, and we stand with you. We have to do what's right. Delshia?
Yes, I'm here. Yes. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to come before you all to say again what my sister has said and what so many of us hurting mothers and those who have lost loved ones have said. Enough is enough. My son, Hardell Sherrill, 27 years old, my only child, went into the Beltrami County Jail for possession of a firearm. He broke the law. He knew that he did, and he was ready to pay his debt to society. But what they did to my son was absolutely murder. They killed my son. I used to say my son died in Beltrami County Jail, but after I hired an attorney and they looked and found what they found, particularly when my son called me and said, "Mama, they think I'm lying. They don't believe me." When he called me crying, saying he was in excruciating pain, Lord Jesus, to be in a jail cell alone and die alone with no one around you, no family, no one that you know of, is just inhumane, to say the least. My son was taken into custody on August 24th. He walked in good spirits and was in good health. 3 days later, he fell out of the bunk. We don't know what caused him to fall out of the bunk. I have my theories, but I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to stick with the facts. But my son, something caused him to fall out of his bunk. And from that day forward, for the next 6 days, my son pleaded to the medical staff, MEND, who I believe needs not to have the right to provide any type of medical care anywhere in the state of Minnesota. They need their license revoked. My son's death is not an isolated death. We have been asking Keith Ellison, the governor, to do whatever you need to do a full-blown investigation into what is going on in Beltrami County Jail in Bemidji, Minnesota. 5 deaths in 3 years in a 150-bed unit is way too many deaths. And all of the deaths that have happened either to the Native American community or the African American community. And they've all been suspicious under medical circumstances. I have been asking everyone that can make the change happen to shut Beltrami County Jail down. They do not deserve to operate as a jail. Their license needs to be revoked. 6 long, agonizing days my son suffered. not one correctional officer in there, not one of the medical staff in there cared enough, looked at him as a human being, not as a criminal. And let me just say, they treated my son worse than a criminal. They abused him. They neglected him medically until his demise on September the 2nd. My son got so bad that even the jail administrator, Calandra Allen, refused to take him to the hospital to be evaluated based on the fact that she thought he was trying to escape. And the thing that baffles me about that is that how can a man who was in the pen, had no bowel control, no control over any of his functions? He was paralyzed from the neck down. How was a man that they say was going to run, he couldn't even walk? My son walked in on the 24th and was carried out in a body bag 9 days later. And everyone that saw my son, that so-called went in his room, they failed miserably with the well-being checks, with everything that they were supposed to do to care for my son. They did absolutely nothing. There are tons of videos. If you Google my son's name, Hardell, and that's spelled Hardel, and his last name is Cheryl. It looks like Sherelle, but it is pronounced Cheryl, and that's spelled Sherrell. If you look at the videos of what they did to my son, it is gruesome and very hard to watch. But like Emmett Till's mama, she had to allow her son to be seen in that casket so that people would know the truth of what they'd done to her son. People need to know the truth about what real racism looks like in the state of Minnesota. And we are sick and tired of being sick and tired of going out and telling the same story over and over and over again. It's been a year and a half for me. Some of these mothers like Tashira Caraway and some of the other mothers that have been out here, Philandro Castile and the rest of them, Jamar Clark, oh my gosh, the names, are hundreds of names long. They've been out here fighting well before I came to this club that I don't want a part of. But we've been out here and we've been telling that same story over and over and over again. And we should not have to grieve the loss of our loved ones and fight and grieve and fight and fight and grieve. Now I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to end with this call. As I said before, I appreciate your giving me the opportunity and time to hear my story. My prayer, because I'm a God-fearing woman, I pray that what you've heard today, each and every one of you, hearts would be touched, your minds would be moved in such a way after hearing all of these heart-wrenching stories that you would move to do what was right, because we are tired of fighting for what is wrong. Enough is enough.
Thank you.
I thank God. I just want to say this last thing.
Okay.
Paul Snell with the Department of Corrections did a re-evaluation, a re-review of the very first evaluation that was done, or the first inspection that was done months after my son first died. And they claimed there were no violations in my son's case. But Paul Snell looked at over 800 videos, over 400 documents, and he, I'm sure, had to just feel like, wow, how could you guys have even lied and tried to cover up what all happened in Beltrami County Jail? Because they work by the good old boy system. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Oh, let's hide this document. Oh, let's not put this out there. Let's not put that out there. Oh, because they don't want to lose their jobs. We're talking about lives here. I don't care about a job. People need to be criminally charged for what they did to my son. Criminally charged. And I will fight if it takes me to the day I die to get the justice that my son and his 3 little girls that they snatched away from I have been left with 3 granddaughters who do not have a father anymore. And I will continue to fight until we get justice. But we are asking you all who have the authority to write it in pencil and make it plain and write these bills into laws so that we are all on the same level of equality, because injustice to one is an injustice to all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dale. And to share, you know, the two of you, you know, your stories need, I know it's as painful it is for you to continue to share your story. You was there almost for every meeting with the Deadly Force Encounter Work Group. You travel across the state to share your story, to make it clear, to, you know, to bring some light to the darkness. And so I just want to thank you for doing that, because your story brings truth. Your stories are powerful. And there are, you're right, there are so many, from Valerie Castile to all the other mothers who are fighting for justice. We just want to say, you know, we hear you, we value you, we keep you lifted up in prayer, and we're going to keep fighting for laws and policies that will hold officers accountable and to prevent these senseless police brutalities. It's important that we do that. We are at 3:06. We're supposed to end at 3 o'clock. Again, thank you both, along with Reverend Carr, for sharing his stories and all the other stories and storytellers who have come, you know, before, current, and hopefully all that needs to lift their voices up after this day and after this moment. But we need to close out. I just want to say that, you know, as legislators, I fight. There's so many ways that we all have to fight. You know, mothers are doing the fight. You know, we are doing the fights as legislators in the way that we know how to create laws and policy and practice that represent and support all of us. That's our fight. You know, to the protesters, that's a fight. There are so many ways that we need to get to justice. Justice. Yes, justice for all of us. So I'm going to end it there. I guess I want to let Carlos send us off. We got a few minutes to do that. We talk about what's next.
Before Chair Mariani speaks, I also want to recognize that we still have a lot of questions on Facebook on here, but I want you all to know that just because our time is limited today, it does not mean that you cannot reach out to us or contact us. And so I encourage you all to continue contacting all of us and your lawmakers. As you all have heard, we are the only divided legislature in the country right now, and we are at a point where we need to know how to move forward, and we can't move forward without input from the community. And that is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation with all of you today, is that there is a reality, and that reality is that the Republicans control the Senate, and we have to either make a compromise or we go in, go big, or go home. And we need your help in this fight. And so I encourage you to reach out to Chair Rena Moran, her office. That's rep.rena.moran@house.mn, to let her know where you stand and how we can move together as a community, and so that we can all here best represent your voices here at the state legislature. And I know I've heard from several of you who have also contacted me too, and I appreciate hearing from you your perspectives on how we can move forward. And so now I'll leave it to Chair Moran and our Representative Ruth Richardson to close us out. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jay, for sharing that. Are you all able to hear me okay? I'm sorry, I'm in the car. Just want to make sure I'm coming through.
Yes.
Yes.
Can hear you fine.
Thank you. So So I'm hearing all of the horrific stories, that have been shared by families today is completely devastating. And I know that before George Floyd was murdered, our communities, as has been said many times, have been crying out for justice, and our community has been crying out because they are exhausted and they are tired of being tired. One of the things that everyone has the opportunity to do within this time, the only way that we are going to be able to move anything and get anything done is if our Senate colleagues recognize the POCI Caucus, they recognize our humanity, and they respect us. And what respect looks like, is actually acknowledging our caucus, acknowledging our bills, and acknowledging our attempts to negotiate with them in good faith. We have showed up, we've talked with our community members, we've had hours of hearings, we've passed the bills off of the floor. And throughout that whole process, we have done absolutely everything that we could do to center the voices of the individuals that have been most close to this pain. And a number of us that serve are close to this pain as well. We know what it feels like to lose a family member at the hands of police. So where we are now is in the House, we've done our work. We need the pressure to continue to come from the community to ensure that the Senate shows up and does the work that they need to do in order for us to move these bills forward. And that pressure, we cannot let up. We have not only George's memory to uphold, but so many other memories of people who have been lost. And the 20-year history that we're talking about just within the state of Minnesota is just a drop in the bucket, and we know that. And so I encourage you all, as exhausted as you are and as tired as you are, to continue to show up, continue to speak out, and continue to pressure the Senate to do what is right, because this is not about Republican, it's not about Democrat, it's not about anything except seeing people's humanity and doing what's right. So thank you all for showing up today and continuing to push the Senate to do the right thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Until next time.
Carlos?
Well, Representative Shaw and Representative Richardson said it better than I can. And, you know, the whole reason we're here, the whole reason we do this work is because of you in the community. We're part of that community. These events touch our lives as well. So our heart and our soul is in it all the way. But it doesn't mean that we don't need you. We don't need each other. We need your strength. We need your passion. We need your energy. And we need you to challenge us as we do the same, you know, with this institution that's long neglected, the realities of our communities and the trauma that continues to be perpetrated on Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous people, immigrant folks, Muslims, just a lot of harm that we have some power to be able to stop, but we can only do it if we all support each other and do it together. Look for opportunities, absolutely, to press the Senate. Don't matter if they're not in your senator, communicate with them, tell them, you know, to act, speak loudly in public, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, keep the faith, keep this thing alive with one another, speak together, speak constantly. We're going to be looking for some kind of action sometime in the coming week, actually in Senator Limmer's district. Look for the POCI Caucus Facebook. We'll work to get that posted there if we're able to pull that together. Let's keep on, man. I appreciate everyone's participation today. And And much love and respect to everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Moran.